We identified one of the problems for sponsorship, which
Youth
is
sports, I believe, has more fan equity
absolutely
than
what is just the broad definition of first party data and what is important
places.
data.
So the key to unlocking scale is to
Mhm.
find sponsorship is about 100% about being able to package something that can provide.
Youth Sports Insider, where passion meets opportunity.
Welcome back to another episode of Youth Sports Insider. Today we have a guest, Andy Thwaite. He's a business consultant in the sports tech arena for his company called At Play Media. Andy, welcome to the show.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad today, we're going to have Andy introduce himself, but before you do that, I'm going to ask you a quick question, put you on the spot. What do you hope? Now, the listeners saw the title of this, right? They saw the description. What do you hope they walk away with today?
I think for me, it's about sponsorship and advertising in youth sports, being able to do good for the kids in youth sports. And what I mean by that is if there is a way that the youth sports industry can generate more revenue for itself through sponsorship and advertising, that money is
Yeah.
used to ensure that there's better equal access for kids to play sport. And I think that's really sort of the big goal here.
Okay, great. And why don't you dive into your background? What makes you, I guess, qualified to even be talking about that? You have quite a background though in sponsorship. So,
Yeah, so I mean, I've been in the sports tech game for 20 years now, and I've worked with IMG, the biggest seller of sport. I've worked within WPP, so the biggest buyer of sport. I've worked for big media companies like Turner Sports. So I've kind of sort of seen all sides of the sports media sort of sponsorship world. I'm now so working. I have my own business, and I'm working with a number of different sports tech companies who I believe have some really innovative, cool solutions that are making sort of sports better
hmm,
in different ways. Personally, I played youth sports as a kid. I'm now a dad with four kids who have or are playing youth sports. I'm a coach of youth sports, so I have a strong passion for the youth sports industry, but also feel that maybe could bring some of that sort of pro sports experience that I've had and into sort of helping the youth sports space.
yeah. Well, and you have enough kids for a basketball team with one sub, so that's impressive. Hats off to you for managing managing that and work, and uh, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
there's not a dull moment there for sure.
Exactly. I would imagine not. So let's dive in. What is it about youth sports that it makes it difficult for sponsorship to scale?
Yeah, so I mean, the way I would sort of summarize youth sports, right? It has an incredible proposition, but terrible packaging. So just if
Hmm.
I explain that, I
Yeah.
mean, in terms of the proposition, right? When you're in the sports in the pro sports world, there's a lot of talk around like fan equity, which really means like how important or how invested is that fan in the sport or team
Hmm.
they follow. Well, youth sports, I believe, has more fan equity
Absolutely.
than professional sports. I know that just a real life example. I saw a few weeks ago my football team, Liverpool from the Premier League in England, um, was playing and they were playing to win their sort of second Premier League title in 30 years. Sunday afternoon clashed with my son's soccer game, right? So you would think that there's like, okay, what do you do? What's more important, right? I mean, there wasn't even a second doubt, right? Of course, I went to my son's game and watched the game. I recorded Liverpool and watched that sort of later. But I think it's just a great way of showing like yeah, youth sports is people have more equity, more investment in that than in
Hmm.
pro sports teams. So like phenomenal equity, right? And then you look at a sort of like a very macro level, youth sports has, Super Bowl TV sized audiences every single week, right? So they got a massively engaged audience.
Massive.
Actually a massive audience involved, right? So this is the what an amazing proposition that youth sports is.
Right.
However, and this is the big sort of however, and it's been well documented, right? The youth sports is obviously so super fragmented
Yeah.
for a brand or sponsor who may want to sort of get involved in trying to reach their target audience amongst the youth sports audience. It's so difficult. So like if we take a scenario like I'm a brand and I'm gonna go, oh well, I'm gonna reach the sort of Super Bowl TV audience. Well, I have one conversation to have, right? It's with CBS or NBC. And you buy your 30-second ad and you're done, right? If I was that same brand and I wanted to try and reach that youth sports audience at scale, I'd probably have 100,000 conversations to have. It's just like not possible, right? It's not
Yeah.
practical. I have a good friend of mine and he works for one of the big media agencies and focuses on the sports side. And he told me like generally they would advise their clients sort of not to go down the youth sports route when it
Hmm.
comes to investing because it's just too difficult, right? So yeah, the problem that youth sports has is it's just too hard to buy, right?
Yeah,
And I think
interesting. Yeah.
there's kind of two parts to that, right? There's the it's really hard to find the right match where the brand's target audience will reach that youth sports audience. But then it's also very hard to spend the money in advertising to then reach them. So it's very hard to find and it's very hard to spend. And when you add those two things together, it just too becomes too difficult. So yeah, the youth sports industry's challenge is how do I turn finding the audiences and spending against the audiences easy in a
Mhm.
way that it isn't today and more akin perhaps to sort of like how easier it is with pro sports.
Yeah, and obviously there's some people tackling this right, but you're right. This scalability is the tough one. Do you have a pulse on, since you've worked at some of these organizations before, like when does it get interesting for a brand? If they could reach what? If they could, a volume of X, or be able to reach volume of X with, demographic breakdowns, when does it get really interesting?
Yeah, and obviously that'll vary right by the brand. Some brands are more
Yeah,
interested in a regional play, something in a sort
right.
of like in a national play. But obviously, there's a buoyant, obviously professional sports sponsorship market, and you're looking at, sports brands in there that, have a sizable sort of fan base. So yeah, you're talking in the millions, not the thousands, right? That sort of like make
Mm-hmm.
it interesting. And where you're right to point out that there's definitely is progress is being made within the industry around being able to have a sponsorship proposition and give brands the opportunity to advertise to an audience. I would say so it's great progress, but it's almost to me like there's sort of needs to be sort of like a step change to get it to a place where, realistically, if I go talk to my friend next year, right, at the media agency, he says, wow, yes, now I'm advising all my clients to move into to use sports because the proposition is amazing, and now I can kind of easily reach and spend against that. So that yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's really the scaling of advertising is not easy today. I mean, we'll get onto it. There's a few ways I think that youth sports can think about to try and get there. It involves embracing data and technology, and it involves the spirit of collaboration and not creating competitors within the youth sports industry space, trying to get brand dollars, but creating people who collaborate and find the 1+1 equals
Yeah.
three solutions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and let's start at a high level. Let's, what so we identified one of the problems for sponsorship, which is scale, right? Just that, if if an advertiser, and again, broad strokes here, uh, can reach one buyer or one seller, right, and go across multiple, okay, problem solved, right? So, right, okay, we're not there yet. So then, uh, how do we, what gets us maybe stepping in that right direction in order to do that? You know, every zip code in the United States, right, has some sort of sports activity going on at the youth level, right? So that's, one, we identified the audience there. We identified that the passion is there. The problem is the scalability. And again, we don't need to reach every zip code, right? But we need to have scale, right? So, you kind of alluded to it. How do we get to that scale?
Yeah, so great question. So I mean, so a lot of the work that I've done again in pro sports has been looking at how the sports owners can use their fan data, so audience data, to
Hmm.
help their brands connect in a way they're not necessarily very good at doing today. And for me, I believe that access to data, so
Hmm.
audience data, is really the sort of the critical thing to help youth sports create that scale. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but it isn't. But
Yeah.
I believe that's like a key part to sort of like unlocking this problem that exists. And just to kind of like take a step back, and it's like this problem of, yeah, how do I, let's say I've found the orders, and how do I kind of like actually run ads to sort of target them, the sort of the spend, how do I spend well, right? I think, it's it's good to look at people like Facebook and Google. Like, they get billions of dollars of brand spend because they've got these huge audiences
Right.
that people can very easily target. Now, they may not necessarily have the best targeting or the best access to that audience data, but they have easy access to them at scale. And that's why Facebook and Google make sort of so much money from brands. And then you look at this whole space of retail and commerce media. So a good
Hmm.
example being Amazon,
Right.
or in the media space being Walmart Connect, which is Walmart's advertising business. Now, what is happening here is the Walmarts and the Amazons of this world are using their first party data, so data they have on their audiences, on their customers, which is extremely valuable, and they're letting brands tap into that audience and then send advertising messages to them that are specifically targeting them, the ones that are of interest to them. Walmart Connect, for example, that's gone from a $0 business 4 years ago when it's launched to a $4 billion business. So
Wow.
it's found a way to scale phenomenally, but it's doing it basically by the power of its first party audience data. So
Okay.
I believe that there's a solution that could be created. Think of it as the Walmart Connect for youth sports. Right? But again, it's easier said than done, right? Because
Right.
if you think about, okay, so where does all this data on the audiences of youth sports sit? Well, it sits in so many different places. So,
That's right. Yeah.
okay, well, there's all the parents are using Game Changer or Team Snap or Sports Engine, and they're registering, for different sports and leagues and teams. So there's a whole bunch of registration data sort of sitting there. And then they're buying uniforms for their sort of teams, and they go into like a squad locker, and there's like a whole bunch of data around people buying uniforms over there. Well, and then they're going to go buy the cleats and the shorts and the other uniforms, training tops, etc. And they go into the Dick's, or they go into maybe sort of a rally house. So there's a whole bunch of data that sort of sits there.
Right.
Folks that are really involved in the sport, maybe they become a member of the sport through their national governing body, US soccer.
Right. Hmm.
That's like, well, then there's a whole bunch of sort of data that sits there. And then you've already kind of, Bill alluded to the sort of like the sort of zip code data where there's like, youth sports is an active thing. There's people going out to the different parks and recs to sort of play and train and watch. So there's actually kind of location movement data that exists.
Yeah.
There's companies like Active Exchange and Placer who have that kind of data as well. And then you have, again, going back to the team snaps and the game changers of this world. Now you can, follow the games as they're going on. You can
Right.
go
Yeah.
get training, coaching tips. You're going on just to sort of to find out where the game is that weekend and communicate
Yep.
with the coaches and such forth. So there's a lot of different places where the sort of youth sports fan, for want of a better phrase, kind of like data exists. Of course, but it's all very, very siloed, right? It all sits in sort of different places, which is not very helpful to create scale if you've got lots of sort of siloed places. So the key to unlocking scale is to find a way for these data owners to sort of collaborate to be able to, in my view, like kind of create almost like what if there was a single database
Mm-hmm.
of the youth sports audience, which came from all of these different places? There was some kind of alliance that brought it together. So collectively, that could be sold or made available to brands, and then suddenly brands have that access to an audience in one place versus the 100,000 places. Again, easy to say, it's hard to do. But for me, it will take an alliance and a collaboration from within the industry to really sort of help unlock this potential, right, of bringing advertising and sponsorship dollars into the industry. And as I was sort of saying at the beginning, for me, why this is so important is because if youth sports is going to grow from its 30 something billion-dollar industry, which it is today, into a 60 billion dollar industry, which is being reported to. But the main way it makes money is by asking parents for registration fee. They have to travel, they have to buy gear. Then that goes against the philosophy of creating equal access for everyone. I believe
Yeah.
the sponsorship dollar can help create equal access by funding things that are just getting more and more expensive. So which is why I say it might be blue sky at this point in time, but I believe it's really, really sort of important to create a not only growth for youth sports, but a healthy growth that ends up helping kids, right? Which is what this is all about, ultimately.
Well, if we can get a man on the moon, we can figure this problem out, right?
I mean, the way I see it, the data exists and the technology exists, and I think the
That's
smart
right.
exists to make it happen. And then it just needs enough people who sort of believe in the benefit of doing it to go out and have the hard task of turning something which, yeah, feels like a stretch into a reality. And I'm sure there's more baby steps in how it gets there. But I would feel that that's one of the best routes that the industry sort of can take to kind of take this proposition which they have and make it easy to spend against.
And talk to me about well, again, for some of us who are on this podcast or listening to the podcast, what is just the broad definition of first party data and what is important data to have? And there's different data points because you mentioned, you have zip code data, you have, registration data, you have purchase data. Obviously, all of that is the holy grail. But if, again, maybe think about that I'm a tournament operator. I own a facility. I own a, large AAU team, right? W- What should I be thinking about from a first party data perspective, but first define first party data?
Yeah, so first party data is basically data that organization or business owns. Right? So it belongs to them. So they own if they have a customer's paid them money, then and they have data on that person. That's first party data because they own that
Hmm.
data. As you rightly point out, it can come in different forms, right? So it could
Yeah.
be it could be a transactional element to the first party data. It could be which is like buying an entrance fee for a tournament, for example. It could be behavioral, which means, oh yeah, I'm going on to Game Changer to check out the schedule and when the game is happening that weekend. So they're behaving in that way. And then the other is more sort of a demographic per perspective, right? Which is,
Hmm.
like your sort of like your age and demographic, etc. So there's a lot of different types of data, and you're 100% right. One piece of data is helpful, but it's not as good as if you can combine all these different data types to create a much better picture of who that audience is. And the better you know them, the more valuable it is to a brand who's like, well, this is the kind of person exactly that I want to reach because I think they're my target customer.
Hmm. So, Facebook, let's just take Facebook and Google. They have a lot of data on us, right? So you could argue that, well, they've already aggregated the data, right? They already have access to they already have access to you, but you also have this other persona, which is your sports parent that does these actions. So why is it even important that we think about this sponsorship and sponsorship youth sports? Because I just go to Facebook and I can reach you already.
Yeah, and that's another great question, right? And to the point that I made earlier, right? Facebook and Google make billions of dollars in advertising because they have a huge audience and they make it really easy to go and just run a campaign to target.
Hmm. Right.
So they have great quantity of audience,
Yeah.
but they don't necessarily have very good quality of data
Okay.
with that. Whereas if you look at, let's say, and we talk about the youth sports industry, and we take my blue sky example of being able to collaborate around all these different sort of data types and bring it into one place, then you know the youth sports fans so much better with all of that data than you would by ever going to Meta and asking them the same question or to Google and asking them the same question. So, and this is why the Walmart Connects of this world are doing so well because they get to know their customer, in the case of sports fans, so much better than anybody else, much better than Facebook, much better than Google, so they can deliver better results because of that.
Hmm.
And that's kind of like the USP there is, yeah, if you want to just get quantity but low quality, fine. Your results won't be as good if you now have so much better ways of finding exactly that fan and knowing them so much better and then being able to kind of target them because of that.
And so is this focus then, uh, again, I'm background is in advertising and I understand the industry and uh, you I'm going to make an assumption here. A lot of what you've been talking about, and even Walmart Connect and Google, Facebook, is all digital online. There's
Mhm.
the aspect of, a banner hanging in a gym, right? As far as youth sports sponsorship goes, right? A activation on site at a big tournament, right? We've had guests on here, that's what they do, right? They do on-site activation. Is that it has the same problems, right? Scalability, there's lots of events happening around just taking the US market, then don't even think about the global market, right? Because that's, um, just exaggerates the problem. So, i- i- um, isn't the thing about youth sports, though, it's I'm there, right? I'm watching, I'm present, right? Watching my young player play. Um, there's is there value in that for a sponsor?
Well, I mean, 100% yes, right? That sort of
Hmm.
experiential, the moment that's, you can argue, the most sort of valuable, right? That's when you're at your most passionate, right? And invested
Yeah,
when you're watching the game. So this is certainly not about saying, hey, don't do that, right? Because that's important. Is actually a lot harder to scale because say it's in this physical world and
right. Yeah.
digital is technology enabled, which helps you scale things whereas putting signs up around parks and recs is harder to scale. You need like a lot of people. But yeah,
Hmm.
sponsorship is about 100% about being able to package something that can provide the signage and the experience and the samplings during events that's adding value, hopefully, like to that experience. Um, but then once, they've left the field, right? There's still that youth sports fan. So in all of these other places where they're going on to sort of Team Snap because the parents are messaging afterwards, or they're just on Facebook and on their feed or on these different places. That's where you can reach them in addition to reaching them like during the actual game itself. So it is
Hmm.
a separate but very important part of what sponsorships can bring. I think the key thing is if you did that without the digital is an ever increasing and more valuable part of being able to reach what I call like the fan on their sort of fan journey. If you take it from like Monday through Sunday, right, you can talk to them and reach them as a fan across all of those 7 days. It doesn't have to
Mm-hmm.
be restricted to the 2 hours if they're watching baseball on a Saturday afternoon. It can be about finding ways to talk to them, and have that sort of strong connection across all of those different places.
Yeah. That totally, yeah, it makes sense. And you're absolutely right that to scale the physical is harder, and it's not one or the other. It can be both, and they can both work together, right?
Right.
I
And I
definitely see
think,
that.
and Bill, there's another part to this that we haven't sort of touched on yet in
Yeah,
terms of um the problem for brands. Like we said, well, it's how do I spend my money? It's really hard to spend it, right? But it's
yeah.
like, how do I find where I want to invest in the first place? It's
Okay.
actually a huge sort of challenge. And this is sort of another part of, again, if you look at the sort of the professional sports industry, you have companies like Sponsor Pulse and Sponsor United who basically have these data intelligent platforms that allow brands to smartly and more objectively find where they should be spending
Mm-hmm.
their money. If you
Yeah,
look to the world of college athletics and the world of name, image, and likeness, right? You now
right,
have
right.
and more like a long tail of sort of sponsorship and advertising, right? You have
Yeah.
well like open open doors and open sponsorship, right? Of creating in effect these sort of like marketplaces to connect brands with these sort of athletes who can now be sort of sponsored again. It's all being
Yeah.
supported by data and technology. And if I were to sort of summarize that and say, hey, what if youth sports had something like that? I would be saying like, is there uh, a Zillow for youth sports, right? I think that's
Yeah.
the analogy that I would use in
Interesting.
kind of
Yeah.
like connect very, very large amounts of very small buyers and seller together.
Mm,
I think if you
yeah.
think of it like
Yeah.
that, I think that would be kind of like for me the what the solutions could be, right, for
Yeah.
helping brands find, the sports to advertise against and sponsor in the first place, because that's just as much of a problem is the finding as it is the spending.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like that, yeah, you had an exchange or a marketplace, right, of all of that. And again, I would say, kind of what Team Snap did. They bought a company. I'm blanking on the name, a few years ago, that's what they were trying to do, right? They're building this network of youth sports organizations, and Team Snap is headed in that direction. They sell, across a network of different youth organizations, and obviously they have a huge database of youth sports organizations too, right?
And my and
So,
my and my thought there is, and there's maybe let's say there's like 5 or 6 main players in that space,
mhm,
right? And
yeah,
this is granted my sort of collaboration versus competition, right? If
mm,
all 5 or 6 of those guys are all sort of selling sponsorship or advertising right now,
yeah,
there's brands are getting 5 or 6 conversations around, well, these players that offer them that opportunity. What if there was an alliance and that 5 or 6 was just one, for for example, right?
right,
I looking and I spent, as I mentioned, I spent time at Turner Sports and I worked on the
mm,
Sport Illustrated business there, the digital side of the .com business.
mhm,
And one of the sort of main sort of sports news sites, what was very common practice, people like NBC Sports and Yahoo Sports, which you would think of as competitors, but they would, collaborate and come together and partner and basically sell themselves together because they have more chance
mm,
attracting advertiser dollars if they brought themselves together and their bigger audience together than if they try to fight against each other to get them. And I think there's maybe a sort of similar interesting principle here, and which is why I think like yeah, data and tech alone isn't going to solve it. You need
Hmm.
a spirit of collaboration and thinking about the bigger picture to really grab those dollars. You made the sort of the point earlier on when we were chatting about like what's the sort of scale you sort of like need to get
Yeah.
to, or if you're one alliance talking to brands, you have more opportunity. And again, I know I'm talking blue sky and theoretically, you have more
Yeah. Right.
opportunity to
Right. Right.
land
Yeah.
the scale than if you were just one person amongst another five and they kind of hearing it from six different people versus one that has actually better scale.
Hmm. Well, and when we were talking off air, a lot of the reason behind this is, we were talking about is accessibility, right? Making youth sports more available as the cost is going up, right? So, the concept is if we can get sponsorship dollars to help supplement the cost. I why? Let's answer the first question. And again, if again, we probably don't have, and we can make assumptions on this, but first off, why is youth sports so expensive today? What's your feeling on that, thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean it's embraced here in the US anyway, right? It's embraced the pay to play model, right?
Hmm.
And it's become yeah, a for-profit business. So everyone's out to make money, and there's this sense, and I've seen some statistics recently, right? Basically, like parents like think that 95% of parents think that their child is going to play college.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, the reality is
Hmm.
it's like 6%. I might have got those numbers wrong, but it's like a very high number. I think they will, and a very low number actually do. And parents are going to invest their money in that because they believe it's and it is the way to give them the best advantage to achieve playing college sports or
Yeah.
what have you. So we've the in the US has created this pay to play model which creates inequality, right? It creates a lack of access to play. My personal belief is that's wrong. That someone basically you're allowing those with the biggest pockets versus those with the biggest talent, right, to succeed and have a chance across these sports. And I just think, fundamentally for me, that's wrong. And one thing as well as feeling very passionately about youth sports and the ability to have access to
Hmm.
play, is where I see that sponsorship can play a role in sort of like correcting some of the challenges that this pay to play model has. And my worry is, does it get worse as it becomes more expensive to fewer people? I think is, does youth sports growth or is youth sports growth bad for kids, which would be a terrible thing to happen, right? And
Right.
that's
Right.
why I feel
Right.
like there's a
Yeah.
there's an incredible proposition that brands would love and would benefit from being a part of, and their sort of the ability they want to do good, right, and all the benefits that youth sports provides. That it really feels like the industry should work hard at a very difficult challenge to sort of try and bring some of that money in and making sure that money does do good and doesn't just add to like extra profit margin, which obviously
Right.
is a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, 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 exactly. I mean, that's, yeah, you kind of, yeah, we touched on that, and that's, obviously a fear that we're just padding, right, the pockets of the organizers, right, as more sponsorship dollars come in. But I'm going to take the counter to that. There's definitely, like, I live in the Bay Area, so in, I look at my town. Okay, so that's in Moraga, little town. We have a rec league. Okay, so there's a rec sports league that does volleyball, basketball, softball, soccer. I might be missing one or two or one in there, but so there's the rec league, and that is for, you know, the sports, making it more affordable, keeping the cost really low. It's set up as a nonprofit. Okay. Then let's go to the extreme. Then we have also the AAU. Let's talk about basketball and volleyball now. Big club teams that are sponsored by some athlete or Nike or whatever. And then a big group in between, just smaller organizations. Again, it could be across any sport, right? Uh, so there is this range, okay, in my town right now, and I know we're not the only one. So are we making it a bigger deal than it actually is and having access to youth sports? And uh, is when we talk about access to youth sports, what are we really talking about?
Yeah, I mean, good question. Right? Access is the ability for everyone to play, right? And
Hmm.
there's always this playing to have fun or playing to be a little bit more competitive.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
both are fine. It depends on the
I,
individual, right?
yeah, and I'd say of course I only have experience in sort of my local township too, but
Exactly. Yeah.
my sense is there isn't like an equal ability. Everyone should have the right to, if they want to just play for fun, but if they want to play a little more sort of seriously, you want to be able to do that. So I think
Yeah.
maybe if there are enough sort of rec leagues of sort of low cost that does give everyone, accessibility, that's kind of good. But then if the aspiration is to take it beyond fun, that's where the sort of the fairness disappears, right? Because it comes that you have to be able to pay to do
Right.
that,
To do that.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that doesn't exist everywhere, and I'm not naive to say that, access is going away, right? Right, that's why Steph Curry started Eat, Learn, Play, one of the reasons, right? To provide access to families in Oakland to have access to youth sports, right? So, there's organizations dotted all across the United States that are tackling some of these problems, especially in lower income areas. And here's another question for you that's on the same lines is why does youth sports matter? Like, why are we, and again, there's data on this, but I did want to hear from your opinion. Like, why does this even matter?
yes, I mean I I love sports and I love not just sports about developing and being a player of sport, right? It's about all the probably maybe the least important part of youth sports is all of the other sort of mental and physical benefits that youth sports provides, from giving kids that maybe don't have a lot of confidence to have more confidence, to feel like they're
Hmm.
part of something, to give children the reason not to be sitting on their iPads for 16 hours a day and going out and doing something that's really good for their body. There's so many benefits. And again, this is obviously, as you said, well documented. There's so many
Yeah.
benefits, the sort of healthy lifestyle that is associated with youth sports. To me, that's why it's so important. And it doesn't have to be sports. There's other activities and hobbies equally make
Yeah.
sense. But we're talking about youth sports here.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think for
Exactly. Yeah.
me, yeah,
Yeah.
they're just so, and this is why the sort of for good element that brands could bring, because brands want to do things that are for good, as in terms of sort of sponsorship that becomes more and more important to brands be able to come in and do something that's for a good cause, right? So youth sports is
Hmm.
an extremely good cause because of all the amazing benefits that it provides people that are
Yeah.
involved in it. And yeah, I won't bore you with any more kind of examples of that. And I think it's just such a help to society, and for individuals that can be part of it. It transcends so much stuff.
Yeah, and I asked that question to get to the root, right? Youth sports is extremely important to the development of the child. And as you said, there are a lot of things important to the development of that child. Like movement, I guess at the end of the day is an important aspect of growth and being a healthy individual. And then on top of that, now we're talking about team sports, for example, and even I guess even individual sports where it's about showing up on time, being disciplined, right? Getting the practice in, teaching them all those habits that'll set them up for future success. And, again, a lot of data on that. So, and coming at this from, okay, you hinted at it, maybe the budgets for sponsorship is not from, your traditional budget at a CPG, but maybe it comes from their CSR budget, their corporate social responsibility budget, because they want to do good with that budget.
Right. And I think you're starting to see that with the endemics, right? Since already mentioned Nike of this world, right? The endemic sponsor within youth sports. But I think, the non-endemics too, yeah, they want to do good and be able to connect with an audience that could be their customer too. So I say there's under-leveraged um, budgets there that I think are ready to come to youth sports, but to do good for youth sports.
Yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. In it, you look at yeah, when I had ESPN on Kevin Martinez, I talked to him, and he was very honest, and I said, you're putting $5 million towards youth sports, right? And this is basically the equivalent of ESPN's, CSR, right? So they're putting $5 million, they're spreading that out to different organizations. And, one of the reasons they're doing it is because they see the youth sports fan slipping, I mean, less of them, which then that means when they grow up, they're less interested in sports, which is going to hurt ESPN, right? And he was very honest, and this is why we're doing this. We want to create lifelong fans of sports, right? Now, do they care about the child? Yes, they do, right? I don't want to, say that they're all about, just getting more fans. It's, no, they do care about it, but at the end of the day, they have a social responsibility to the corporation as well with those budgets. So, um, and I'm okay with that. Uh, the however it happens or however it starts, it's got to start from somewhere. It's $5 million budget, right? Spread across different organizations. I don't know, just take your big corporation, Ford Motor Company, right? Putting money towards youth sports, right? And on one hand, I say, okay, they have the money. Who cares if it can't, let them do the work to make it scale, right? Versus,
Mhm.
okay, if an infrastructure doesn't exist and they do care about this, then okay, you're going to have to put in a little work to make it happen. Does that making some sense?
And it makes sense, and I say that the and there's going to be brands that will do that, right? They will put the hard yards in, and I think my perspective was to get the maximum amount of, call it extra funding that sponsorship and
Yeah.
I can bring. You need to make it as easy as possible and as frictionless as possible. Because there's lots more easier ways that maybe they can sort of spend. I mean, I agree when you're coming at it from
Right.
the sort of
Right.
like the sort of the CSR lens, it's a little bit sort of different how you sort of think
Yeah.
about it. But I think the generally speaking is you make it easier for people to invest and harder, whether that's finding what to invest in or how to then spend it once they've invested in it.
Yeah.
Again, that's where I go back to the role of data and technology and
Right.
collaborating across the industry to do that. None of these things are easy things, but
No, no,
and
they're not for
I can sit
sure.
on my perch and talk about this stuff, but yeah, where my head's at.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, and it totally makes sense. And and again, I love the perspective and getting different perspectives on how we tackle this problem is, why we started this podcast, right? And we're looking at ways that we know We know kids should be playing sports. We know the expenses going up, and if we can um, come together as you were saying to okay, let's in our individual silos that we're working on, right? When we go and when you turn this podcast off and you're doing your day-to-day work, how can we just come together though and fix this growing problem or feed this growing problem in the right way and make changes that are needed so kids continue to play sports and they continue to be active and we have different levels of sports so whatever type of athlete you are you have a home.
Right. I mean, it's one of the problems, right? It feels like such a big problem that no one person can fix by themselves. So you're kind of like, well,
No,
I'm going to make a difference, so let's not bother. I mean, I look at, the platforms that like the Aspen Institute have. I mean, you look at things like
right.
that being a great
Pick-
way to sort of
yeah,
maybe sort of try and create change through somewhere like that,
right.
if it is a big brand, making a statement. And what you have to remember with, and I talked a lot about pro sports, but there's a lot of sports right in that area. So take the IOC and the Olympic movement as an example. They're not for profit organizations, right? They make a lot of money, but it all
Yeah.
goes back into the good of sport. And we're kind of talking about a very sort of similar model here.
Hmm.
There are brands who want to, you know, sell themselves through the platform that the Olympics has, but all of that revenue is going plowed back to do good for the sport in different ways. And it's kind of what we're talking about here for youth sports.
Well, and since you work with companies in the UK and Australia quite a bit as well, is it any worse or better for them and the other countries, or do we have the same issue?
Uh, no, US is maybe quite unique, right?
Hmm.
The pay to play model is a tough model,
Okay.
perspective. Um, the industry works uh, bottom up here, whereas in the UK and Australia, it's top down, which means it's a lot more easier to. It's like the organizations who are tasked with growing the sport have
Hmm.
more control to do that in the UK and in Australia, where here, the US soccer, youth soccer is my sport as an example. I had the mandate to grow the sport of soccer, but they don't really have many ways that they control doing that because they have, this sort of like organization infrastructure underneath that's very, very sort of fragmented and hard to do, and everyone's out to make as much money
Mm.
from their part that they can, and that's very difficult to manage. And I think it makes it it's a lot harder to do in the US than in other parts of the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, for example, if I wanted to do a sponsorship and I wanted to sponsor soccer, youth soccer in the UK, I would just go to the association because
You go to
they're
the
governing
FA
about it. Yeah.
and it would be able to sort of trickle down and they'd be able to sort of manage all those parts to it.
Okay.
You do it in US soccer. Well, let's US soccer and do some stuff, but then I need to go to one, two, oh no, suddenly you get to 1,000 other people to sort of like really sort of make sure I'm doing
Yeah.
it as as much as I can.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And then, yeah, so in the States, right, yeah, you do have US soccer, but they have little control over, some guy that just wants to start a soccer club, right? He can follow his own rules if he wanted to and how he trains and goes about teaching the kids, right? Yeah, 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 yeah. That totally makes sense. So let's put a nice bow on this. We're pontificating a little bit. We're talking about possible solutions. Again, this is great because these conversations we need to elevate, and that's why we have them and figure out. Maybe someone's listening to this, say, "Oh, I have a great idea," or right, that can take this and run with it. Or maybe that's you and you're consulting with some of the companies that you work with. So you have the floor, you have in a magic wand, right? And I think you kind of talked about it a little bit, but what is your magic wand situation to solve the youth sports sponsorship scalability issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and I might have used these analogies before, so I'm probably repeating myself, but to help brands find these youth sports audiences and bring investment to them, let's create the Zillow of youth sports, right? A place where every sport organization, no matter how small, can be found and can get access to brand investment. And then let's create the Walmart Connect of youth sports, where youth sports is using the very valuable data that it has. We just realize that how valuable it is, and allow brands to target those audiences again using technology, making it easy, making their spend easy. I think those again, but to do that, we have to collaborate. The industry
Right.
has to collaborate. So can we create those solutions in a collaborative way? That would be my magic wand, to create those solutions and have this word of collaboration. Again, very blue sky, I'm sure, and maybe slightly naive along the way, but yeah, if I had my wish, I think it might be that.
Well, and I don't think it's naive to think that. I mean, again, we've as an industry have solved harder problems, and as a society, again, there's value in making youth sports accessible to everyone, not putting the burden 100% on the parents, supplementing youth sports with sponsorship dollars. I mean, at the end of the day, that's how that's what we're saying. That's what we want, right?
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
I, I love the phrase, the Tom Hanks phrase from League of Their Own. It's the hard that makes it great. So I say
right,
this is a hard problem, but a hard problem worth solving. If you solve it, then I think
right.
great things can come from it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Andy, I appreciate your time. This has been a great conversation on youth sports, and I appreciate your wisdom and your insight, and even your you're trying to solve this in approaching it from multiple different aspects in the your day-to-day work too. So and I love seeing all your comments across LinkedIn, and you're right on spreading the word. So keep going on what you're doing. We appreciate that as an industry, and keep in touch with the Sports Insider.
Thanks, Bill. That's been an absolute pleasure.
All right. Till next time, check out the usportsinsider.com, where we have other great interviews like Andy's coming up. So usportsinsider.com, make sure you subscribe there. Andy, thank you.